So, namaskar, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for day 2 of our youth conference, our first of its kind youth leadership conference put on by our young Kathak dancers of the Chandam Youth Dance Company in partnership with students of Lila Academy in Los Angeles, as well as Sarila Academy in Denver. I gave a bigger intro to this whole conference yesterday. I'm not going to do that today. Um, Thank you for all of those who joined yesterday. It was a really, really very stimulating experience, I think, for us all. And today we are going into a little bit of a different theme, and that is specifically about how we as South Asians, and in this case, it is going to be the youth talking about how to find and understand the best way for which we can be allies to the cause of supporting Black Lives Matter, of equality for our Black American brothers and sisters, and really being a part of fighting the larger structural and systemic racism that exists in our country, in the United States. So that is what today is about. As I had mentioned yesterday, that the idea for this conference came about towards the beginning of the pandemic, but as things started to evolve, um, the girls really wanted to pivot a big part of the conference to talk about what is going on socially in our country. So that is what it is. I am not going to talk anymore. I am going to hand it over. We have a wonderful, inspiring, we're very excited about our guest speaker today. We will then have an interview with her, followed by audience Q&A. So please get ready, keep your questions ready, and please type them into the YouTube comments. We will have a lecture demonstration again by another one of our graduating seniors, and then we will have a panel discussion to close the day. So I'm going to bring on one of our youth company members, Manibha Sengupta, who is going to introduce our speaker. Manibha?
Hello, everyone. Namaskar. My name is Maniba Gupta, and I'm 15 years old, and I'm a rising junior at Irvington High School in Fremont, California. So I've been learning Kathak dance since I was 5 years old, and it's been 10 years now since I've been doing it. And I recently joined the youth company. It's been around 2 years since I've been in YC, under the assistance and guidance of Rachna Didi and Ahana Didi. So today we have with us our final guest speaker of our second day of our conference, Who Are We? And that is Apurva Handagal. And I'd also like to thank all of you who are attending this conference today, as well as the ones who attended yesterday, because this means a lot to me and the youth company as we've hosted, and this is our first conference that we're hosting live. So thank you so much, and a big shout out to all of you. So Apurva, she currently serves as a Princeton in Asia Public Health Fellow, and she's a research analyst in Tractus Asia. So our theme for today's conference is finding the ally within. And we have to find the ally within ourselves first before we actually search for allies in this outside world regarding such disparities. So basically, this theme, we discuss about the vital roles that we South Asians play in order to help this discrimination and eradicate it in future regarding our African American brothers and sisters. And on top of that, the youth company and I were really interested in inviting Apurva for our interview or our conference is basically on our senior thesis on brown and black solidarity and the South Asian American anti-blackness awareness and movements. Because in order to enhance her thesis, she interviewed like at least 17 people like from different age groups in order to analyze how South Asians can support Black lives and that they really do matter in our society today. And we're so extremely fortunate to have Apurva with us here today to share some of her experiences, her work, and while she's fighting for racial disparities amongst the Black community. So I'd like to welcome Apurva to our conference today to share some of her works and herself.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Maniba, for that introduction. And thank you, Chandam, for inviting me to speak today. I'm really looking forward to this. Can we please pull up the slides? Perfect. Thank you. So I want to preface by saying that everything I have learned on this movement comes from Black, Indigenous, and Dalit, or lower caste South Asians. I am merely here as a conduit, contextualizing what I know to support you South Asian youth in joining the fight for Black life. Next slide, please. So for today's next hour, I will first be doing a presentation on systemic anti-Black racism, brown-Black solidarity, police brutality, casteism, and anti-Blackness, and steps that we as South Asians can take to express solidarity. We will then have a Q&A session with an interview with Maniba and then take audience questions. This will be a lot of information and it will be heavy, but I have my contact information at the bottom if you want to talk more after this conference. Next slide, please. So my senior thesis, which I conducted from 2017 to 2019 for my undergraduate career, stemmed from experiences growing up in predominantly Asian areas in the Bay Area, specifically Fremont. And I was hearing stereotypes and worries about predominantly Black and Latinx areas in the Bay, such as San Leandro, Oakland, Berkeley, and Richmond. At the same time, I was learning about the incredible history of the Black Panthers that started in Oakland and decades of South Asian solidarity with Black communities. So I wanted to explore how are these contradictory ideas and movements existing at the same time, and how can we fight anti-Blackness within our own community while fostering solidarity. Next slide. So to understand anti-Blackness, we need to understand that the US was founded upon indigenous genocide as well as the enslavement of Africans. And although slavery and segregation that we learned about in school have ended decades ago, they continue to be reproduced in institutions that we are very familiar with every day. These cycles continue. They include police, prisons, redlining, and the school to prison pipeline, to just name a few. So police in the US originated as slave patrols in the Carolina colonies in 1704 to hunt enslaved people who escaped and create terror on enslaved communities to prevent riots. During the civil rights movement, police officers used tear gas, water hoses, and attack dogs to incite violence among peaceful protesters. They profiled LGBT communities across the US by raiding queer bars and arresting patrons, such as at the famous Stonewall Inn, which led to the modern day Pride movement that we have. Studies show that policing and patrolling neighborhoods neither decreases crime nor makes people feel safer. And we really have to question who are police really protecting and who actually feels safe with their presence. Today, predominantly and historically Black communities across the US are most heavily policed, and Black people are most disproportionately injured, killed, or arrested by police. Then we get into prisons. Predominantly Black people are kept in jail with high bail bonds, which can criminalize if they are poor. They are given long and extremely unfair sentences in prison compared to white people who committed the same crimes. And in the US, we have a private prison industrial complex, which means that for every bed that is filled with a prisoner per night, private prisons make money. So they're making money off of keeping Black people in jail for a very long time. When people are released from prison, schools and employers discriminate against formerly incarcerated people in getting opportunities, and thus many of them, in fact 61% in California, end up back in prison. And many large corporations that we know of, such as Walmart and Starbucks, actually use prison labor, in which people only get paid 15 to 90 cents an hour. And this is modern day slavery. Redlining. So you can see this map in the bottom corner. After the Great Depression, FDR's New Deal included the National Housing Act of 1934. Now, lower class people were able to afford loans, but banks wanted to ensure that people would keep up on mortgage payments. So these residential security maps separated neighborhoods by class and race into the best areas, businessmen, good areas, white collar workers, declining areas, working class families, and detrimental or hazardous areas, which were predominantly immigrants and Black communities from segregation. So even though people in the red areas were not more likely to miss paying on their mortgage, they were labeled as such, and thus they found it very difficult and nearly impossible to receive loans for education, for housing, and other needs. Property values in those areas thus dropped, and crime increased because when people don't have access to their basic needs, that's what happens. And white flight, white communities ensued to surrounding neighborhoods out of the city, which led to the establishment of even more segregated Black communities. So housing segregation and loan discrimination continue today. And public schools are funded by property taxes. So schools in predominantly Black areas have fewer resources such as counselors, extracurriculars, and this can impact students' ability to pursue further education. Next slide, please. This goes into the school to prison pipeline. Schools have punishments that criminalize mostly Black and Latinx kids from as early as childhood, from as early as preschool, sorry. School resource officers, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, patrol schools, just like police patrol neighborhoods, and serve detentions, suspensions, and expulsions for things, small things like being late to class, dress code violations, and even Black girls wearing their natural hair. Expelled students are 3 times as likely to end up in juvie, and then 67% of them end up in jail again before they're 25. So these 4 institutions that I talked about are just a few because this country was founded on anti-Black racism, it persists throughout everything we see. For example, there's environmental racism in which predominantly Black communities have factories that come and pollute them. We have medical racism in which hospitals and physicians have historically discriminated and harmed Black communities. So continue to look for these patterns in your everyday life. Next slide, please. South Asians and Black Americans share a strong history together of struggle and solidarity that is not often talked about. From the 1880s to the 1960s, South Asian Muslim men shared neighborhoods, apartment buildings, and eventually families and homes with Black, Creole, and Puerto Ricans across urban American cities. Together, Black and Brown people shared social constraints against power and citizenship, criminalization, and relegation to manual labor and service sector jobs. However, as these neighborhoods were transformed through gentrification, redevelopment, urban renewal, neglect, and outmigration of South Asians to wealthier suburbs, these memories and this solidarity has been lost. Next slide. In 1942, the Black press was reporting heavily on India's anti-colonial civil disobedience. Horace Cayton Jr. was a very influential member of the Black press as an editor of the Courier newspaper. The Courier asked its readers, "Do you believe that India should contend for her rights and her liberty now?" And out of 10,000 Black respondents, 87.8% said yes. So you can see a very strong solidarity between both Black Americans and Indians under colonial rule, both fighting toward freedom. Next slide. Ram Manohar Lohia was an Indian freedom fighter who supported Black freedom fighters in training new civil rights leaders. He was jailed in 1964 for violating Jim Crow laws. And you can see during early South Asian immigration to the US, a lot of them were actually considered Black or put into similar categories. So by using this label to really put themselves in the position of fighting towards freedom for Black people, they're really being vulnerable and really showing true solidarity versus rejecting that label and moving towards whiteness, which is what the majority of South Asian communities today do. Next slide. So the next year, we have the monumental Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965, which eliminated any racial and nationality-based discrimination and led to the first substantial wave of professional, high-skilled South Asian immigrants to the US. However, it was civil rights leaders who were the main ones, Black civil rights leaders, demanding these changes in immigration and freedom for not only themselves, but for all communities of color, including South Asian immigrants. And we have to understand that these were educated, professional, skilled workers who came. And in today's immigration world from South Asia, we see that many of them are in the tech and medical industries. And often this ignores a lot of South Asians who came as refugees, who came and are undocumented today and are lower class without higher education. So we need to understand that our community is diverse and includes them as well. Next slide. So I did my thesis research in Chicago, and you can see here that it is extremely historically segregated. So I started my journey every day in Hyde Park at the University of Chicago, which is this Asian and white area among a predominantly Black community that it often does not open opportunities to. And I would take the Red Line Metro all the way up to Devon Avenue, Rogers Park, which is a historically South Asian area, and it's really diverse in terms of nationality, class and caste, professions, and immigration waves. Next slide. So I would go to Devon every day, and Devon Avenue is a stretch of 200 South Asian stores, mosques, temples, grocery stores, bookstores, jewelry shops, you name it. And here's one of the books that really influenced my research. And that image is actually the same section of the street that I found 30, 40 years later. So it's really interesting to see how much of the bustling activity has actually changed. So I wanted to interview both regular folks that I met on Devon. So I would just walk into stores, introduce myself, and have a conversation. But I also wanted to talk to South Asian community organizers, people who had recognized this need to show solidarity with Black communities and were actually working in the field. So I conducted 16 interviews with 17 participants aged 18 to 67. 8 of them were small business workers and 9 were community organizers or activists. 10 were Indian, 4 Pakistani, 1 Indian and Qatari, 1 Bangladeshi, and 1 Afghani. 9 were Muslim, 7 Hindu, and 1 Christian. 2 were working class, 2 lower middle class, 10 middle class, and 3 upper middle class. 4 were first generation immigrants, 6 were 1.5 generation immigrants, which means that they immigrated in childhood to the US, and 7 were second generation immigrants. Next slide, please. So I consolidated my 17 interviews in these 6 results: anti-Black racism, class-based barriers, unwillingness to learn, African Americans versus African immigrants, shared violence in policing, and Brown-Black solidarity models. And today I will touch on the last 2. Next slide, please. The organizers and activists I interviewed all work at South Asian-centered organizations in Chicago. We spent much of our time together discussing ways South Asians and Black communities have similar systemic challenges that are faced differently. Though shared struggle is not the only reason for solidarity, it is another entry point and motivation for more South Asians to extend support and resources to their Black neighbors. 23-year-old Dara was the former executive director of the South Asian American Policy and Research Institute, SAPRI. SAPRI has been holding workshops fighting anti-Blackness for years, and their summer 2018 event series titled Ahimsa, The End of Violence, connects Black and South Asian communities through shared experiences of systemic violence. And here you can see this photo is from an event I attended where actually a Bharatanatyam dance group used a dance performance to initiate the conversation of Black and South Asian, not only cultural similarities, but political challenges. When Dara was discussing the origin of the Ahimsa series, she focused on how we have a duty to advocate for other communities of color, especially in a place as historically racist as Chicago. Next slide. Dara told me, what's the point of advocating for an issue if we're not going into communities where that issue is potent, where there's bias around that issue? Ahimsa started from the rise of hate crimes against South Asians over the last 2 years. But we can't just advocate for violence prevention against South Asians in a city like Chicago, where there's such high rates of violence against Black, Latinx, and other communities. Through the work South Asians do, Dara stresses uplifting other communities of color and their voices, not claiming an issue to be purely South Asian when there are others dealing with it too. Thus, there can be work done together against these issues that still recognizes each community's particular context and experiences. Next slide, please. Police brutality hurts us too. Post 9/11 and post Trump's election, state violence against and surveillance of Brown, immigrant, and Muslim people have soared. By fighting against racist systems that hurt our Black communities, we can help liberate all of us from white systems that oppress us. However, we must focus on how Black people disproportionately face these forms of racial violence. So I recommend all of you check out mappingpoliceviolence.org. Some statistics from there show that there were only 27 days in 2019 where police did not kill someone, and they actually murdered a total of 1,004 people in 2019. There is no accountability for police. 99% of killings by police from 2013 to 2019 have not resulted in officers being charged with a crime. And this is because police can violate constitutional rights without actually suffering consequences in court. One example of this is called qualified immunity, in which public officials who violate people's rights maliciously will be immune unless victims can demonstrate their rights were clearly established, which is a very tricky legal loophole to actually prove. Worldwide, in the first 24 days of 2015, police in the US fatally shot more people than police in England and Wales combined over the past 24 years. This is not because Americans commit more crimes than Europeans, but because our police inflict unnecessary violence. Next slide, please. So imagine that these are two aunties in our community. One says, police protect America. These are just a few bad ones. They're not all like that. But the other one responds, this is less about the goodness and badness of individual cops and more how they are acting in line with a justice system that is fundamentally unfair. The system works under a huge bias against poor people and minorities that can allow for police brutality to occur without consequences. Former Dallas Police Chief David Brown said, we're asking cops to do too much in this country. Every societal failure, we put it off on the cops to solve. Not enough mental health funding? Let the cops handle it. Here in Dallas, we got a loose dog problem. Let's have cops chase loose dogs. Schools fail? Let's give it to the cops. That's too much to ask. Policing was never meant to solve all those problems. So to combat this, we need to continue to implement non-police solutions to social problems. To end homelessness in this country, it would cost $20 billion. Free college for all, $34 billion. But our police budgets combined are over $100 billion, and most of this money does not belong there. So to implement non-police solutions, crime goes down when people have access to their basic needs, such as affordable healthcare, housing, and employment, and that's where the resources belong. So this can look like social workers in schools, mental health professionals who answer 911 calls for suicide attempts, community leaders who support their neighborhoods instead of police patrols, and survivor advocates who support 911 calls for domestic violence. Next slide, please. Beyond understanding from South Asian organizers why South Asian Black solidarity is necessary and how to go beyond solely supporting South Asians, I sought to learn about specific tangible ways to enact cross-racial solidarity. My interviewees brought up various practices they use, such as racial equity analysis, cross-racial coalitions, transformative solidarity, and collective resistance. Fadila is a 36-year-old Indian undocumented community organizer serving undocumented and uninsured South Asians in Chicago. She highlights conscious and intentional solidarity where Brown folks understand the institutional and historical privilege they do have in the US and keep in mind who's most impacted by an issue. Next slide. Fadila told me we all need to check our privilege. When we walk in as a brown person in an all-Black room and say, I'm here to stand in solidarity, we all need to understand that I can't take the mic away from the person who's directly impacted by it. In activist and liberal circles, there's this need to say, I am your ally, let me speak for you. And as an undocumented person, I find that offensive. Brown-Black solidarity can only be sustainable, ethical, and effective if Brown folks are centering the experiences of Black people and not consolidating them with their own. It is important to be respectful, to listen, and to take a step back in Black-led spaces. Fadila calls to all South Asians. Never try to come up with a solution for them. No, this is their fight and they will make the best choice. Next slide, please. In the 1940s, Indian Dalit civil rights activist and chief architect of the Indian Constitution, B.R. Ambedkar, wrote to Black civil rights activist and NAACP founder W.E.B. Du Bois. Ambedkar wrote, "There is so much similarity between the position of the untouchables, or lower caste Dalits, in India and of the position of the Negroes in America that the study of the latter is not only natural, but necessary." Ambedkar goes on to inquire about the National Negro Congress's petition to the United Nations, which attempted to secure minority rights through the UN Council. So you can clearly see how the fight for Black American freedom guided his thinking. On July 31st, 1946, Du Bois wrote back to Ambedkar enclosing the UN petition and pledging to send a copy of the NAACP's statement to the UN. He closes by saying, "I have often heard of your name and work, and of course have every sympathy with the untouchables of India. I shall be glad to be of any service I can render if possible in the future." Du Bois continued to serve as a strong supporter of South Asian liberation movements, collaborating with Gandhi, Nehru, Tagore, and Lala Lajpat Rai, among many other Indian freedom fighters. He saw India's freedom fight as a blueprint for the fight for US Black civil rights, just as Dalit leaders did in seeing a blueprint of Black civil rights for their freedom movement. Several years later, in 1972, the Dalit Panthers were founded in Mumbai, inspired by the Black Panthers to fight casteist repression and murder and push an autonomous Dalit perspective in post-independence India. Civil rights leader Fannie Lou Hamer famously said, "Nobody's free until everybody's free," and the stark similarities between the conditions of Black and Dalit communities proves that we cannot fight anti-Blackness without simultaneously fighting casteism as South Asians. Next slide, please. In South Asia, through caste oppression, historically Dalits have been forced into segregated schools, villages, places of worship, and subject to violent oppression. Sound familiar? In India today, despite the caste system being illegal, it has persisted and thrived for 2,500 years. As South Asians immigrated to the US, they brought casteism with them and replicated it as they formed cultural communities and gained social capital. Dalit-led organization Equality Labs released a monumental report in 2016 documenting caste oppression in the US, reporting that 25% of Dalit Americans who responded to their survey said that they had faced verbal or physical assault based on their caste. 2 out of 3 Dalits reported being treated unfairly at their workplace. And I'm sure you are all following the current civil rights lawsuit filed by the California government accusing Cisco of unlawful employment practices discriminating against a Dalit applicant. Many Dalits working at American tech companies have called attention to the irony of their casteist colleagues and workplaces, supporting the Black Lives Matter movement all of a sudden, while continuing to oppress lower caste South Asians. Equality Labs founder, Dalit rights activist Thenmozhi Sundararajan said in a webinar I went to last month, "This is what I'm talking about in terms of co-liberation. Oppressed people see each other quite clearly. We know that we need each other, and we are the only ones that will hold each other when the state comes for us. That's why we are asking people, if you have been part of a legacy and a lineage that has led to Black death, you need to be able to aggressively deal with your history, your legacy, but also contribute now." I encourage you all to check out Sundararajan's and Equality Labs' work and learn how to fight casteism in your own community alongside fighting anti-Blackness. Next slide, please. I want to touch on Desi's Rising Up and Moving New York 4 levels of solidarity graphic that they've created and try to identify where you are right now and how you can move upward. So number 1 on the bottom is symbolic solidarity, verbally expressing solidarity, putting out signing statements and wearing symbols. So a lot of these might not actually have tangible, beneficial impacts to support Black communities. Transactional solidarity is you show up for us and we'll show up for you. And that's not how solidarity should be. Embodied solidarity is individuals literally embodying and living their vision of the world, such as individuals and activists blocking ICE vans to support deportations. And transformative solidarity is when masses of oppressed communities choose to forgo something that would benefit them and not take it because it comes at the expense of other oppressed communities, such as upper class and upper middle class Queens residents who stand to benefit from Amazon coming into their borough, joining the No Amazon fight by mobilizing for actions, putting pressure on the mayor, governor, and local state officials to keep Amazon out because of its very unfair working conditions in warehouses. Next slide. So finally, what can we do? Confront anti-Blackness that you see in your community and recognize how you benefit from white institutions. This process definitely needs to be uncomfortable. It definitely needs to be us looking in ourselves and looking in our families and communities and really sitting with that and embracing it. This isn't supposed to be a really enjoyable or happy process for any of us. Listen to and learn from Black organizers, academics, and friends. And to just name a few, Black Lives Matter founders Patrisse Khan-Cullors, Alicia Garza, and Opal Tometi, professors Dr. Angela Davis and Dr. Cornel West, and organizations such as Black Women Radicals and Black Visions Collectives. Next slide, please. Demand from your schools, police departments, and representatives to redirect police funding to other community resources better equipped to keep us safe. Donate to and fundraise for organizations by and for Black people and also donate to individual Black organizers themselves. So I would say look into your community, do some Google researching and find small, locally led, Black-led grassroots organizations that could use your support through donating or through creating community fundraisers. A lot of national organizations like the Modern Day, NAACP, and the Black Lives Matter Foundation, which is not really affiliated with the Black Lives Matter movement as much as it should, are not actually doing the work that they need to do. And by supporting local and smaller organizations, you can ensure that you are supporting them. So in the Bay Area, I recommend People's Breakfast Oakland, the Ella Baker Center for Human Rights, and Black Earth Farms. People's Breakfast Oakland serves Oakland's houseless community essential resources and provides political education for youth. The Ella Baker Center for Human Rights works to end mass incarceration and criminalization and demand reinvestment in Black and Brown communities instead of more imprisonment. And Black Earth Farms ensures low-income and houseless people have access to healthy food, and currently they're delivering free food to Black people who have been arrested, bailed, or injured from protesting. Also check out the website defund12.org, where you can find pre-scripted emails that show up in your inbox to send to your local officials to have conversations about changing police funding. Next slide. So I want to end on these really famous quotes by Dr. Angela Davis. You have to act as if it were possible to radically transform the world, and you have to do it all the time. In a racist society, it is not enough to be anti-racist. Not enough to be racist. We must be anti-racist. Thank you so much. Here's my email and my Instagram if you'd like to talk more in the future.
Wow, Apurva, that was really enlightening to me. And, I'm still processing all that information. And we all know that, racism is such a serious issue. And, it has a lot of detrimental effects. And we do need to reflect upon what we can do in order to support the African Americans and what they basically go through in their daily lives. So, yeah, and I have a few questions for you. And yeah, let's get started. So my first question is, in general, South Asians are typically not so passionate or so motivated about combating, racism, especially on how it impacts Black Americans and the African descent. So what factors have motivated you to pursue your senior thesis on Brown-Black solidarity? And are you planning to initiate any other projects on Brown-Black solidarity and relations in the future?
Definitely. That's a really good point, that often it's mostly the privileged South Asians that are not really having these conversations. But through my research, I really saw that it was the more oppressed South Asians, whether they were undocumented, refugees, whether they were Muslim, whether they had really gone through struggles that they share with the Black community, they were organizing and they've been talking about this for a long time. So we really need to prioritize their voices and work alongside them as well. So my senior thesis was motivated, as I said in my talk, about experiences growing up. And, when I started my project, I had really heard about, Latinx and Black solidarity, Korean Black solidarity, all these different forms, but I really wasn't seeing, Indians or South Asians expressing that as much in terms of my more privileged South Asian circles here in Fremont. So I wanted to do this project so that I could turn it into community resources and access to, how do I just talk to my parents about this stuff, my grandparents, my siblings, people in my community, and doing talks like this to really make this information more accessible. So currently, you can see in my background, it says Kannadigas for Black Lives. So I come from the state of Karnataka in South India. So a few Kannada friends and I have actually started doing talks in our own community, kind of, like we talked about today, but more contextualizing it for ourselves. So that's one thing that I'm currently working on, and also trying to create fundraisers when I can. So the Ella Baker Center, which I mentioned, I put out this fundraiser and was able to raise and company match almost $6,000 just in the matter of a few days. So I encourage you all to really do the same, because these things can really soar once you put it out there.
Yeah, definitely. And so for your senior thesis, when you interviewed like community organizers as well as like, the general public in Chicago, were you surprised with any of the results?
I was a little bit surprised with hearing older folks that were really radical, really progressive. Like one woman I interviewed, 67-year-old Sulu. She's a grandmother and she grew up in India and then lived in Jamaica and the US. And she had these particular experiences, and was talking in, a language that I had only heard from young people. So I think it really shows that, a lot of the conversation today is like, young people will lead the movement, young people will fix the problems, and that is very true. But we also need the support of older folks who maybe don't have the same thinking as Sulu to take that on, because they have been here for a while. They most of them have voting rights. They have cultural capital and social capital, which means that they have built a network of opportunities to create. So yeah, I guess that surprised me, but it also just reinforced the idea that adults need to be part of this conversation just as much as youth.
Yeah, that's true, because like in our society now, like because adults and older people have like different views compared to like the youth, because like how we were raised and how we're like growing up. And definitely we need people like Sulu in order to combat this racism and like anti-blackness and all of that. So yeah.
Definitely.
What do you think? Like, what are some of the hardest questions and truths that we South Asians need to ask ourselves in order to become better allies to African Americans?
Definitely. Really, really good question. I see families like my own and my community really, really struggle growing up in South Asia and coming to the US for better opportunities for work and for their children and really succeeding. And, that's how the model minority myth was created by, the US government to really pit communities of color against each other. So although a lot of the opportunities that I have, the success I have today comes from those sacrifices, it also comes from a lot of privileges. So I think South Asians that I have seen who have these privileges are really afraid to admit that, everything they got, not everybody has equal access to them. And we have, special treatments and special privileges when it comes to the immigration process, for example, of, if South Asians are coming over to get college or master's degrees, or if they already have them. That is a privilege that not everyone has. So they get, privileged in the visa process and getting a path to citizenship. Another thing is speaking English, as South Asians. That's happened because of colonization, but it means that it's easier for us to succeed in this country as immigrants as well. So, it's really difficult to do, but we have to think about the white foundational structures and systems in this country that have led to our privileges, recognize that not everyone has them, and then fight for that equality.
That's definitely true. And what obstacles have you faced in your advocacy efforts in like educating the South Asian public or the community on anti-Blackness? And has your advocacy for the community of like anti-Blackness, as well as, you know, the lack of awareness on like Black solidarity, been successful till date?
Yeah, so I would say kind of the point I just touched upon. It's been
Mhm.
really difficult to get people to kind of put their guards down and not be as defensive. As South Asians, we have gone through a lot of community struggles, a lot of racism on our own, and that has led to some of these defense mechanisms. But it's really harmful because we are not the most oppressed group in this country. It's Black and Indigenous communities that are. So that has been a little bit difficult, and that's something that takes a lot of time. And in talking to South Asian adults, it is difficult to often be kind of pushed aside because I'm young, or pushed aside because, you know, I went to this like American liberal arts college and I have this Americanized education and I don't know about the real world, supposedly. And although I don't have these experiences of growing up in South Asia, I learn about them and I learn about them much more so than maybe older folks do. So that has been a struggle. I have been a little bit successful in my family and community, but it's definitely a continued conversation. And that's why this isn't just a one-time effort. Fighting anti-Blackness is a lifelong commitment that we have to make personally and then into our community.
Yeah. And, you know, we all know that Black Americans face much more harsher forms of racism compared to us South Asians and like South Asian Americans. So, in fact, we do have like, we often benefit from this racism. But, like, you know, since like people of color, like, basically we share like similar experiences, and you know we do face like our own discrimination from like, you know, the white system and all of that. So my question is, how do you approach like talking about both of these, like African American, you know, racism and us, without erasing either of them?
Definitely. Really good question. And I would say you kind of answered it in your question itself by focusing on white systems. So you might have seen this video of this white girl circling around on social media when she was, you know, telling her parents, they had said some anti-Black comments, and she was like, no, Black people deserve the same human rights, deserve, you know, all of the opportunities that we have. And the Black woman author, Sonia Renee Taylor, put out this video in response that taught me a lot, and I would encourage you all to follow her. And she was saying it's harmful to focus the conversation on Black people deserving humanity, because by focusing on that, it's self-dehumanizing, that we have to convince people of that humanity. And these are all, you know, anti-Black narratives that we've been fed because of white supremacy in this country. So instead of doing that, we need to focus on the white systems, because the white systems hurt us all, including white people, and they hurt Black and Indigenous people at the brunt of it. So kind of, you know, those systems that I was talking about in my presentation of police, prisons, redlining, and schools, you know, I have seen a lot of South Asians feel comfortable around police. And that's one example where we really have to question, you know, why is that something we feel comfortable with, and how is that harming other people? So it kind of goes into the transformative solidarity model that I mentioned that was at the top of, you know, just because something privileges us, it can hurt others. So we need to really work in ways that support all of us, because, you know, Black activists have said that Black liberation is at the center of all of our liberation. And once they are free, everyone will be free, because we are all harmed by these white systems. So just focusing the attention on that.
Hmm. And you know, like social media is such a big like influence, and it's like really dominant in our generation, and you know, in these past couple of years. So South Asian culture has typically been exoticized by media platforms and other social cultural groups. So like how do these representations have similar impacts on African Americans and their
Definitely.
culture, sorry, and their culture?
For sure. And we see that a lot. We see a lot of exoticization of Black cultures and styles, whether it's dance and music forms like hip hop and rap. And we see a lot of South Asians, you know, using the same music styles. We see, you know, blackface, which is when lighter skinned people, you know, put like foundation or something to make themselves look darker. whether it's wearing hair in braids or dreads, which are traditionally Black hairstyles for which Black people have been kicked out of school, not given, opportunities to get a job. But when non-Black people do that, they seem cool or they seem hip. And it's fine to appreciate, but appropriating is when non-Black people take on those cultural characteristics and styles without actually supporting that community and even profiting and making money off of it, such as Lily Singh, who you have probably heard of and seen her videos. She does that a lot. So that exoticization, I would say, is higher in the Black community because people are consuming it without actually supporting Black lives. And actually, there are stats that show that 80% of people that purchase Black rap music are white suburban college kids. But studies have also shown that 75% of white people in this country don't even have a person of color friend, not to mention a Black friend in particular. So we really need to think about that and make sure that we're being respectful and appreciative without appropriating both culture or struggle.
Mm-hmm. And currently you're working on Princeton in Asia, like the public health fellow as a research analyst, as well as an HPV and cervical cancer project manager. So what drove you to like public health work surrounding marginalized communities, and what experiences have you gained on these works?
Definitely, really great question. It kind of came out of, first being really interested in medicine and human rights since I was a little kid, and really having, this both American and Indian context of it. And, working on community organizing, working on this research has really given me a good understanding of the disparities that exist in the US and how healthcare and public health oppresses, Black people, Indigenous people, undocumented people, lower class people, etc. But I was really interested in a global understanding of this too. So when we think about it, anyone who is in the US is on indigenous settler colonial land. So we're benefiting off of that. And also as a Western country, no matter what our race is, we are benefiting we're benefiting off of the labor and exploitations of people in global South countries such as Latin America, Africa, and Southeast Asia and South Asia. So in understanding those identities, I really wanted to create a global career out of this. So that's why I've been working with Princeton in Asia in Vietnam, and also got to go to India through work and Thailand and really explore how to do public health work as well there. And it's really privileged to have this global view, but I think when we think about it, there are other countries that, the access to public health and the access to human rights is much lower than in the US. But I think at the same time, as we've seen from COVID-19, the US has one of the most underdeveloped healthcare systems in the world. So I think it's kind of contextualizing the US in the greater world that led me to have that global passion as well, but also remain local.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was really amazing. Whatever you said, it was really informative and very thoughtful. So now we're moving on to some questions from the audience. And we have one question, and that is, what role can we play as artists in using our platform to support Black Lives Matter, anti-casteist, and anti-oppressive movements?
Definitely, really good question. So if you remember from my presentation, there was a group Kalapriya, that was doing this Bharatanatyam performance to start a conversation between South Asians and Black communities in Chicago. And, if you think of like culture as an iceberg, the tip that you see above the water is that surface culture, such as dance, art, music, which we are all part of that community. And that underlying part under the ocean includes, things like political and social and systemic issues, which is what that conversation of that event I mentioned really was about. So I think, as a Kathak dancer myself, we as Kathakas, we have, this duty to really tell stories, whether it's, on the stage or in the rest of our lives. So I think we really need to ask ourselves, which stories are we trying to tell? which people feel comfortable joining my dance group or attending my dance group. And for people who don't feel like it's their space, how are we being more inviting to them? And I think also understanding that a lot of dance and art forms really come out of a social justice framework. So for example, Black American hip hop came out of a way to support youth and bring together communities in Harlem. And today, it's continuing to be used to fight for social justice. And we need to understand that, you know, arts organizations, I see a lot of them kind of say like, we're not political, we're not social, we have nothing to say about BLM. And it's really inspiring to see that you are taking a stance on that. But we need to understand that they don't exist in a vacuum. And, you know, because anti-Blackness goes throughout all institutions in this country, we need to really look inward and see maybe how are we perpetuating those too, whether it's, you know, the donors that are supporting us, the people who are coming to our events, etc.
Mm-hmm. We have another question, and it is, what made you decide to make Kannadigas for Black Lives instead of just Indians for Black Lives?
Definitely. So there are tons of groups out there. There's South Asians for Black Lives with the number 4, which is really incredible. Some of my friends started that. There's a lot of, you know, Indians for Black Lives groups. And I saw, you know, Punjabis for Black Lives, Gujaratis for Black Lives, Sri Lankans for Black Lives. And in my Kannada community, especially in the Bay Area, I don't hear any of these conversations. I've never heard them before. So that's why my friends and I really wanted to be specific and make this conversation for us, because we know exactly who we're talking about. We have a good idea of the sorts of class and caste backgrounds that people come from, the sorts of careers that they're in. And, you know, that's our duty, is to really, you know, think about the community that we have the biggest impact on. And because that's a space where these conversations weren't happening, and because all, you know, all these adults have known us since we were small, we wanted to do that then. And if people want to find these Indian for Black Lives or South Asian for Black Lives spaces, they already exist in other places.
Mm-hmm. And I think we have one more question from the audience, and it is, what is your opinion on the terms Black and Brown? Do you think these terms divide communities?
I would say that they could erase communities, but not divide. So for example, brown has been a term that encompasses also, you know, Latinx communities, Southeast Asian communities, as well as South Asian communities. And it is more so being used for South Asians today. And I think it is important to kind of contextualize it in comparison to Black. I would say it can be erasing to group us all together in that way, because, you know, that doesn't account for how we differently experience oppression, and doesn't account for people that experience less oppression versus more. So, you know, terms like people of color can be really erasing of that, because it includes Black people in this group, but, you know, Black people have their own struggles and their own challenges and should be validated as such. So I would say the term Black itself is good, because it's all encompassing of African immigrants, African Americans, which is a term that not everybody feels comfortable claiming, because, you know, there are Black people not just in the US, and we need to be aware of that. But I would say the term brown could be a little bit erasing for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's our, Q&A with the audience. So thank you so much, Apurva. I learned so much, and I'm pretty sure everyone who's watching this has learned so much as well. And, please think about the roles that, we South Asians can play in this allyship for African Americans and the ones who face racial discrimination, like someone or like a race that is largely discriminated in our society. And I'd also like to give everyone a friendly reminder to please donate to the Black Women's Blueprint organization. If you would like, just go to their official website, blackwomensblueprint.org, and donate. And this is for the support of the Black Lives Matter movement. And there's also an option where you can basically refer to the organization when you donate, and please do so that we can see how much we're able to raise and how much money we've raised through this conference. So thank you once again for tuning in, and I'd like to give it away to Samika.
Sorry, I was on mute. Thank you so much, Manibha. Thank you, Apurva, for really a very, very important talk. This is exactly why we wanted to bring you and bring up these extremely critical and important and urgent issues that we are needing to address, particularly in the South Asian community. So and thank you, Manibha, for a really, really great interview. We are going to be moving forward. Our next item for today is a lecture demonstration by Samika Saxena. So we are actually just going to go right ahead and move into that portion. So I'm going to ask, I think it is Samika Agarwal, another one of our youth company members, who's going to come on and introduce her. And then please do stay for that, as well as the panel discussion that is also going to be talking with our girls, having heard Apurva speak, and having their own thinking and on all of these issues, really come out and express themselves. So we hope that you'll join us for these next two events. Samika?
Namaskar, my name is Samika Agarwal and I'm also part of the Chandam Youth Dance Company. And today for our Kathak lecture, we have graduating senior of the YC, Samika Saxena. She's graduating from Irvington High School in the Bay Area and will be heading to college at UC Berkeley to study molecular and cell biology. Samika has been learning Kathak at the Chandam School of Kathak for the past 13 years, under the guidance of renowned Kathak artist Rachna Navas, who herself is a disciple of our source, Guru Pandit Chitresh Das, and assistant director of the YC, Ahana Mukherjee. Even in school, in addition to being a walking encyclopedia, Samika has been deeply involved with her school's drama and choir departments and enjoyed participating in singing concerts as well as plays. I've had the privilege of dancing with Samika for over 4 years and admire the hard work and perfection she puts into everything, especially her dance. From going to SAT classes to attending rehearsals, Samika always puts her 102% into everything. It was as if every single class, Samika came back stronger than ever. To add on to that load, she was always that one person who had our backs and was literally our human planner. I admire her for her dedication and her ability to be quick on her feet. It truly is an honor to be her named twin, and it is my pleasure to present to you Samika Saxena. Thank you.
Namaskar. Thank you, Samika, for the wonderful introduction. It really is an honor to be your name twin too. नमस्कार, मैं अपनी कथक प्रस्तुति में आज आप सबका स्वागत करती हूँ. This is Hindi for I welcome you all to my Kathak lecture demonstration presentation today. My name is Samika Saxena, and I'm a graduating senior this year. I've been learning Kathak at the Chandam School of Kathak for the past 13 years, ever since I was 5 years old, under the guidance of my teacher and renowned Kathak artist Rachna Nivas and our assistant director Ahana Mukherjee. Kathak has been a constant for me in my life, from helping me feel rejuvenated and rejuvenating myself after a long day at school to being in a community where I feel happy and connected. I really hope that as I transition to Berkeley, I can still continue to be involved with Kathak in some way. It is a great privilege for me to be able to present this lecture demonstration today, where I will be dancing various pieces that I've been learning. After I'm finished, I'll be taking audience questions from the YouTube live chat about anything from me to my Kathak journey to the Kathak dance form itself. So without further ado, let's get started. To provide a little bit of background, Kathak is a North Indian classical dance form and the only one to have both Hindu and Islamic influences, showing the interlinked tradition. Kathak literally comes from the word katha, which means story, and a kathaka is a storyteller. So please come join me today as I tell you a story through my lecture demonstration and Kathak dance. My first piece today will be Pranam. Pranam is a meditation in motion, which is universal to all of the other 7 classical dance forms of India. Today, I will be doing a beautiful Pranam composition that was composed by our Guruji Pandit Chitresh Das. The meaning of my dance translates to words as so. Tuning to the higher self through my mind, speech, and heart, I invoke the Lord of the universe here upon the earth. With the elements of nature, I offer to the divine and hold my ears in respect of the knowledge that has come through me through my gurus. I take the blessings of every animate and inanimate object in nature. Through this meditation in motion, I begin my dance. I will be using a tanpura to keep my pitch while I sing. Namaskar. Now we will be moving on to the next section of the dance, and today I will be dancing in Chaptal. The North Indian classical musical system is very complex and mathematical, as you will see. Yesterday, my Guru sister Mallika Parulekar did her lecture demonstration in Teen Tal, a 16-beat rhythmic cycle. Today, I begin my dance with Chaptal, a 10-beat rhythmic cycle, which I will be reciting while I dance. Chaptal is divided into 4 sections: 2 beats, 3 beats, 2 beats, 3 beats. So that totals 5. So the pattern again is 2, 3, 2, 3. I will start off by dancing Chaptal Kramalaya, which are the ascending speeds of Tatkar. Tatkar is the basic footwork of Kathak dance. I begin by doing one set of Tatkar in this 10-beat cycle and then continue doing 2 sets, 3 sets, 4 sets, 5 sets, and finally 12 sets of Tatkar in one cycle of Jhaptal of 10 beats. By the time I've reached 10 sets, I'm actually doing 80 steps in one cycle of 10 beats. I will end this portion by doing a Tihai, a rhythmical pattern that repeats itself 3 times. The 2 Tihais I will be doing are the Sum to Sum Tihai and the Kali to Sum Tihai. The Sum to Sum Tihai has the word sum, which in our dance means 1. So this Tihai will start on 1 and end on 1. The next is the Kali to Sum Tihai that will start on 6 and end on 1. I will be setting a tabla to Jhaptal to keep my beat while I do Kramalaya. Okay, so that was the Chaptal Kramalaya. Now I will be doing the Chaptal Tatkar Ki Bandishes. So I'll be doing the Chaptal Tatkar Ki Bandish, which are 3 different compositions in Chaptal that play around with a mix of chukkers or heel pirouettes, footwork, and rhythm, and yet all start and end on 1. The prefix for each is the same, but the timing of the turns in each are different, with scattered chukkers throughout. I will recite each one before dancing. So those were the Chaptal Tatkar Ki Bandishes. Now I will be moving to the next segment of my dance, which is Kira Takatun composition. To end the Chappal segment, that's the composition I will be doing. The Kirataka Thun compositions are very traditional and old compositions. I'm really lucky that Rachna Didi taught me these. Kirataka Thun composition is the Chakradhar Tihai, or a Tihai within a Tihai. As a reminder, a Tihai is a rhythmical pattern that repeats itself 3 times. I will do each of the 3 segments in different ways. The first segment I will be doing traditionally, where the dancer stays in one place. For the second segment, I will be doing contemporary movement or choreography to use more of my dance space. And for the last segment, I will be sitting down and dancing using bhav or emotion. I've actually come up with this portion myself, and it is done betke or on the ground. So that was the Kirataka Thun composition with the 3 variations. Next segment of my lecture demonstration will be the Takita Takita Dhina series. Now I will be demonstrating a technique called Kathak Yoga, pioneered by our source Guruji Pandit Chitresh Das and advanced by my teacher Rachna Nivas. I will be reciting one rhythm while simultaneously dancing another, all while reciting simultaneously and playing the manjira, which are small hand cymbals, without any outside music. The basic step for this piece is Takita Takita Dhina. I will be messing around with multiple variations of this footwork and will incorporate several patterns, all to end with a final tihai. Te te dhin, ta hin dhin tha, up ta dhin ta ta dhin ta ta dhin ta ta dhin ta ta dhin dhin ta ta dhin 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 ta ta dhin dhin ta dhin ta dhin ta ta dhin ta dhin ta dhin ta dhin ta 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 dhin ta Okay, so that was the Takita Takita Dina series with Manjira and reciting Tintal. My last piece of today will be Holy Tarana. I will end with an expression and Gadbhao piece. This piece depicts a story within two characters, Krishna and Radha. Lord Krishna is a young teenager in the town of Vrindavan who helps his community and is ever caring, and Radha is his beloved who spends much of her time with him. When Krishna played the bansuri or flute, Radha would dance along. This story depicts the joyful occasion of Holi, the Hindu festival of colors, where a pitchkari or water gun is used to squirt colored water and powder at one another to signify a life full of color and happiness. This piece also embodies the Hindu concept of Ardhanarishvara, wherein one person embodies masculine and feminine energies. It is called Gadbhao because one dancer portrays multiple characters. The switch occurs with a palta or half turn in the dance, like so. Krishna and Radha. So that was it for today. That was the Holy Tarana segment. Now, if you all have any questions, please feel free to put them in the live chat and I will try to answer all of them. So one question comes, how did you balance your school life with dance? So this is a difficult job, but living in the Bay Area, there's definitely academics as well and dance. And I think one thing that kept me constant was making Kathak a priority for me. Coming to Kathak class every week was a big priority where I was ready to not do other things and come to Kathak class because I understood the value and the lessons that it was teaching me. With school life, I would try to get up in the morning and practice since high school is obviously very busy. So sometimes I wouldn't have time to come back in the evening and do my dance practice. So I would at least try doing it every morning before I went to school so that I was able to do it. And if that meant doing some school assignments earlier before they were due so that I would be ready to go to class or rehearsal, that's what I had to do. Because Kathak is a big priority for me, as are my academics. And I wanted to make sure I was able to pursue both things throughout high school. I'm really happy that even through junior year, the toughest year in high school, I was still able to continue to excel in academics and come to class regularly to learn. Are there any other questions? How has dance contributed to your Indian identity? So I think definitely as part of being Indian American here in the United States, dance has made me feel proud to be an Indian American and not to shy away when asked about who I am. I think being Indian American is something I take pride in. And doing Kathak dance has taught me so much more, not just the physical dance form, but the history, philosophy, and math, as we always talk about, how old and ancient this dance is, yet the tradition continues today, and yet we are here dancing and performing this dance form, which is not just dancing to music, but dancing while I'm reciting, maybe while I'm singing, and playing the manjira instrument, has definitely taught me to become more confident of being Indian American, and also feeling very happy and empowered that I have a chance today to be able to learn here, and it's a great privilege for me to be here. What are the lessons that Chandam taught you? What are the lessons that Chandam taught you through dance that you will carry through your life? So one thing definitely is that in Kathak, the sixth principle for us is upaj, or improvisation, where we may be called at any time and we have to do a given dance sequence or recite in tal or do some sort of difficult, hard sequence. And that requires an immense amount of attention and focus to detail and practice. And I think that's one skill that dance has definitely taught me, to be calmer in different other life situations, not just when I'm performing, but in conversations or when a conflict comes up. The other thing that Kathak has definitely taught me is practice, and how important it is to stay dedicated to your riyaz, to practicing your dance, and to practicing everything else outside as well if you want it to continue and to remain a priority for you. And the last question I think we have is, where do you draw most of your inspiration for your dance? So definitely our Guruji, Pandit Chitresh Das. I'm very happy to be here as part of his legacy. He inspires me a lot. He brought the dance form of Kathak from India all the way to the United States, pioneered a school where he could teach so many people. And I'm here as part today learning Indian classical dance in the United States. And I think that to me is a big inspiration. Another inspiration at Chandam is definitely Rachna Nivas, or Rachna Didi, my teacher. She's always told me to stand up for what I feel is right and speak, and to be more confident in my dance and my daily life. She has always been important and a primary factor for me. And I always feel inspired by her whenever she dances or even outside of the dance floor. And I think we have one final question. What is one of your favorite Kathak pieces and why? So one of my favorite Kathak pieces, I definitely like the bhav aspect of it, or the expressions. And Holy Tarana has to be one of definitely either my most favorite or one of my favorites, because there's so many pieces. And it really shows the beauty of being able to play two different characters that are different yet connected together. Another piece that I really like doing is Chaptal. This is different from the 16-beat cycle and a 10-beat cycle. And it took me a while to sort of shift the tatkar into this 10-beat cycle and figure out when to go offbeat and things like that. So I think those are definitely both of the pieces that I did today. Components of that are one of my favorite pieces for sure. And final question, are you planning to continue pursuing Kathak while at Berkeley? Yes, definitely. I think now that I am attending, or I will attend UC Berkeley, depending on the COVID situation of when I get on campus, but it's close to home and close to my company here in the Bay Area. So I'm definitely looking forward to taking classes and definitely staying connected with dance. My Guru sister from yesterday, Malika, is also going to Berkeley, so maybe we can get together and go to class together. And if not on a regular basis, I still want to maintain some regularity where I come and I do dance as part of any class, Rachna Didi, Hana Didi, all of the wonderful teachers that we have. And with that, I would like to wrap this Kathak lecture demonstration part completed. As part of this conference, we have chosen to donate to Black Women's Blueprint Organization, and their website is blackwomensblueprint.org. We chose this organization because they help provide resources to empower women in today's society and combat disparities. This is an important cause for us, so if you have the opportunity to, please consider donating to this organization. Thank you so much, Rachna Didi and Hana Didi, for letting me do this lecture demonstration. And I hope you all in the audience really had a wonderful time. Please stay tuned in for our next panel discussion event. Namaskar.
Thank you so much, Samika, for that wonderfully riveting performance. Really amazing job. And again, I just want to highlight how difficult this is to do, not even in the virtual setting, but to be a kathaka, to dance on your own, to manage your own music, your own lighting, your own cues, to be engaging is a true testament to how much training these young ladies have put in to get to where they are. So I will just move us along to the very last event of our conference. This is a panel discussion on how South Asian cultural biases lead to racism and colorism. And the title of this panel discussion is Having the Difficult Conversation. And before we move right along to the panel discussion, I do want to just thank the Chandam School of Kathak and the Leela Academy for providing us with the platform to have some of these very important conversations surrounding the South Asian identity, the South Asian culture and cultural biases that we have, as well as the intersectionality with the African American community, specifically with the Black Lives Matter movement. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce Rachna Nivas, the director of the Chandam Youth Dance Company, who will be moderating today's panel discussion. She has long been a fierce advocate for empowering minority groups, especially the African American community, and is a firm believer in elevating the voices of youth and disadvantaged communities. In fact, it was at Berkeley, she is a proud bear, at UC Berkeley, where she really discovered her passion for social activism, and in particular, social injustices among minority groups such as the South Asian and African American communities. She's a strong advocate for youth leadership and the arts, and really has leveraged her platform as an artist and an educator to empower her students and elevate topics within the classroom, such as the model minority myth, the strength of collectivism, and the transformative power of art. During all of our YC classes, we have consistently had conversations, even before COVID, about these really critical issues, and really about how these girls, as the next generation of future leaders, can really utilize their voices and make transformative change in their communities. Aside from being a director, she is an accomplished Kathak soloist, having toured nationally and internationally with the Chitresh Das Dance Company and the Leela Dance Collective. In fact, she is a founding member of the Leela Dance Collective, a one-of-a-kind, artist-led, woman-led dance company. And she is extremely passionate about today's topic. She long has been. She brought up something very interesting a few days ago about how the youth company is now spanning 3 generations. We have the Gen X, the millennial, and the Gen Zers all coming together and talking and having important dialogue. So without any further ado, I would like to introduce and welcome Reshtan and Abbas.
Thank you so much, Ahana, for that introduction. This has been already a extremely enlightening, I think, weekend for all of us to be listening to and watching the youth and learning. So, that's going to be, we're going to have a little more of that today for this panel discussion. You know, we started this panel discussion. It's talking about how colorism and racism, how biases within the South Asian community have led to these things. But you know, we'll see. It might go into a few other places. So I am just gonna go ahead and bring on all of the panelists right away. So if you all can come on, and I will introduce you as soon as you come on. Yes, so great. So we have Himani, who is from the San Francisco Bay Area. She is 15 years old and is part of the Chandam Youth Dance Company. We have Malika, who you saw dance yesterday. If you were, you had joined us yesterday, she did her lecture demonstration, and she's 17 years old. She is just graduated here in the Bay Area and is going on to UC Berkeley. Go Bears! I'm not gonna share what year I graduated. It's another time, another place. We have Kavya, who is here from LA. She is 14 years, right? You're 14, right? Yes, 14 years old. She's from Leela Academy, and we're very excited to have her. We have Sasha, who is here from Denver, from Surila Academy. And she is 18 years old, and she just graduated high school and is going on to Denver University. That's correct, right? And Monishka, who is also here. She's 14 years old and also from Los Angeles, from the Leela Academy. Monishka, is it possible to get a little more light on you? We want to see your beautiful face, because I know you have many things to say. Do you have maybe an overhead light you can put on if possible? That would be great. So I am just going to jump right in to this topic. We know, as Apurva gave a very, very important talk, and actually what she said at the beginning, I think, was really important, that this is heavy. This is not, necessarily a happy topic. This is not something that is so easy. And a lot of this is difficult to talk about. And so I actually first want to commend all of you, and I want to actually ask our audience to support these girls for coming forward and having the courage to talk about this, and supporting a safe environment for them to be able to share their truths. We know that this is a very heated topic. We know that there are many emotions that are involved in this, but also that silence is the most dangerous thing. So speaking out is the only way that we can learn. Not everyone is always going to say the right things. Everybody is learning and everybody is trying. So I want to ask all of you who are watching at home to please support these girls for their courage in coming forward. I want to start actually with a question to all of you. why do you think now is this topic of injustices that are faced by Black America? We know that it's been going on for 400 years. We know that even after slavery, there has been, injustice after injustice after injustice. We know that in the 1960s, these things were being fought, the same exact things that are being fought for today. What is so big deal about now that this has now become such a big topic at the forefront? And if you guys can all unmute yourselves. Yeah, go ahead, Malika.
So I think there's a bunch of reasons, and I'll start by addressing one. I think having the pandemic here is a big part of sort of something that makes us sit down and look at everything that's happening around us because we have more time, and injustices that we knew were bad the whole time, but we somehow were able to say, oh, this is happening in the news, and just look away from it. I think the pandemic is giving us the time to focus on these things that we should have been focusing on all along, and giving us the reason to sort of not look away from that.
I think that right now we have a lot of useful resources, including social media, where despite being in a pandemic, we're able to share information quickly and share our opinions.
Mm-hmm. What about the fact that, Kavya, we were talking earlier, we actually had a closed discussion in the morning, and you had brought up the idea about Gen Z coming of age. Can you talk about that? I think it's important for our viewers to hear that from Gen Z themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that now, since a lot of people from the Gen Z generation are teenagers, we are starting to have more of a voice about these issues, and we have been talking about it more and sharing our views through social media and just speaking out about it in general.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and adding on to that, I think social media and just seeing that video of George Floyd, seeing those agonizing 8 minutes that we all kind of forced ourselves to watch to not look away again, like I said, to see the horrible things that are happening. I think before there's a lot of debate about, oh, we saw this snippet of a video and we don't know what happened before and after, and people were kind of making excuses. I think that because of the power of social media and because of being able to see the whole thing, there's no argument really that can be made that, oh, this wasn't, there is something else going on, and you can really see that there was just, it was not self-defense, it was just something that was horribly racist.
I also think with the current administration, a lot of people aren't getting the support that they need from their community, and which is why they're taking matters more seriously and more into their own hands, and trying to inspire this change at this time when no one else is supporting them. They want to serve as ambassadors for their community and really use this tool of social media, like Kavya and Malika said, to inspire real change.
So let me ask, these are all really, really important points that, Gen Z is kind of really taking a lead on a lot of this. The fact that the pandemic is made it so that people are forced, nobody is running off to this and running off to that. Everybody is actually forced in a place to be concentrated. And then the issue of the video of the killing of Mr. George Floyd being so incomplete. It was such a complete video and Malika had such a great point, that there were no excuses. So I wanna ask something. I want to pivot a little bit because I want to get a little bit more into the South Asian community specifically, um, and I want to bring it in light of some of the kind of ways in which we think. Now, you all know about the incident that happened right before the killing of George Floyd, and that was the incident in Central Park in New York, where a black man, Christian Cooper, right, was bird watching. You all know about that incident, right, that had happened, and you would agree that there was a lot of outrage and a lot of sympathy for Mr. Cooper for that incident. Did you notice that what was talked about a lot was that he was a Harvard graduate? And how could this have happened to a Harvard graduate? Do you think that the same kind of sympathy would be there if it was someone who had recently been released from prison? And my second part of that question is, do you think the same kind of sympathy would have been there? Do you think that those kinds of attachments of who we are and what we do and what we accomplish in life, are those part of the judgments and ways we classify things in the South Asian community? And is this, I'm trying to unpack some of the biases we have. Sasha, you want to say something around this?
Yeah, so within the South Asian community, obviously we have values, and sometimes those values differ from other ethnic groups. And unfortunately, those values can be misplaced, especially at a time when we're trying to fight for the justice of African Americans. So I guess in this instance, you know, the headline of the fact that he was Harvard graduate, that would kind of ring more with South Asians because of just, you know, the model minority theory where, you know, Indians, South Asians, they have a need to kind of become like a model minority and like look upstanding in terms of academics. And so that kind of shows that our values are misplaced and that we aren't like, you know, focusing on the real issue at hand. And that is that there is racial discrimination and that what has happened, who, even if it did happen to a Harvard graduate, happened to a Black man. And like that in itself is what we should be focused on. And unfortunately, we've gotten to a point where self is racist and portraying that we should be focused, educated individuals rather than just looking at the topic at hand, which is racism.
I think that sometimes our own values can translate into maybe the value we put on a life, which I guess in this scenario, we put a lot of value on the fact that he was a Harvard graduate. And like Sasha said, rather than him being a Black man, and the value from the South Asian community on education and things, and being a Harvard graduate, that was shown a lot here.
So to add on to what you guys all said, I agree. The South Asian community in particular definitely put more weight on his death because he was a Harvard graduate. They felt more sympathy and they were more bad. And whereas the same thing, if it were to happen to like someone who just got out of prison, it wouldn't be as big of a deal in our minds simply because of the inherent value we have on education. And that's an important thing to recognize.
So let's go a little bit into that. We talked a little bit about the model minority myth yesterday. Not everybody heard that, but also in relationship to this, how do you think that the model minority myth contributes to racism in the South Asian American community?
Yeah, so I think the way I think of the model minority myth personally is kind of almost like a defense mechanism. I think that the reason that sort of the South Asian community buys into it more is because since we immigrated here, we are also trying to fit in. And so that we kind of adopted what the system that is that, you know, of whites kind of trying to pit different minorities against each other, like Apurva said in her talk. And I think what that's kind of led to is we are a little more hesitant to speak out for different communities and a little more likely to say that we're different from them. And I actually, this reminded me of one of my favorite poems of all time, probably. And I think it's important because it's kind of easy to say that, oh, this group is being discriminated against, but they're not us. And, you know, so that's why we don't have to speak out for them and we're facing our own problems. But it's important, again, to note that right now, they're the ones really facing the biggest problems. And this is, I think this is a poem actually around World War II, and I'm just going to read it really quickly. First, they came for the Jews, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a Jew. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I didn't speak up because I was a trade unionist. Then they came for the Catholics, and I didn't speak up because I was a Protestant. And then they came for me, and by that time, no one else was left to speak up. And I think it's important, not just, there's two parts of it, right? One part is to have to be an ally, so someone's an ally for you. But like Apurva said, that's transactional, so that's not the only thing that we want to do. So that's one part of it. And then the bigger part of it is just being there for someone who's facing problems like yours on a much bigger scale.
So let's go then a little bit more deeper into some of these biases. Can you guys think of maybe a time, maybe one of some of the earlier memories that you have when you, from South Asian culture or your family or the larger community, where you felt that something wasn't right? Specific, whether it's colorism or racism, even if you were too young to know what those things meant, but it didn't feel right. You guys have examples of that?
Well, the most prominent example that we've discussed time and time again is the Fair and Lovely example, where we have a product that brands itself as a fair, a lotion that like brightens your skin and whitens your skin, but that perpetuates the wrong impression that beautiful people are only the ones that are fair. And I know some of us pointed this out earlier, but whenever we go to India and we see those billboards, they all have pictures of white models or white actresses that have fair skin. And that really can be very hurtful for someone, a young girl that's perhaps doesn't have white skin. It can be really hurtful to her because she may feel like that, well, I have to have light skin if I want to be beautiful. And I think this stereotype is really, I didn't really notice this earlier, but when I visited India and I used to see those types of ads, that really got to me. And I think that's a very important thing that we should work against.
Yeah, I completely agree with Himani. I think that also not only is it white people who are often portrayed on billboards, but also South Asians with lighter skin who they might still be South Asian, but they're carefully chosen for those with really light skin. And that has taught many people that to equate fair skin with being beautiful. And I think that message has been portrayed since we were very young, and that is something which really sticks with people.
Manishka, did you have anything to add to that?
I mean, I was very fortunate to grow up in a sheltered environment. I mean, I grew up hearing things like protect, because I had relatively lighter skin when I was younger. I grew up hearing things like protect your light skin, don't go out in the sun from like aunts and uncles and family members, but I never really paid attention or questioned these things until maybe like I would say in middle school when one of my best friends who had a relatively darker skin tone, she started getting jealous of me for my lighter skin tone, which was something I didn't even realize I had. That was the first time where I like took notice of the situation and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is the problem. Like, I don't want her feeling bad because she's equally beautiful, you know? So then that was the first time I thought we need to do something about this.
Wow, so she was jealous of you, and it was her jealousy that made you start to think that something was up. Sasha, did you have something to add to this?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because geographically, where I live in Colorado, kind of the environment that I was raised in, it was almost like everyone looked the same. And so as a result, it was like a few of us stood out in middle school. It was almost, I had this innate feeling that I had to stick together with or else we might be pushed out or forgotten. And so as a result, I ended up like just sticking with them, and kind of it hurt me because I didn't like interact outside of my Indian circle. And so I think what's a little bit wrong with that that because everybody almost looks the same, everybody has lighter skin, it then makes those who have darker skin stand out and then themselves feeling, an outsider and like they're being ostracized and suddenly they feel like they themselves they're not attractive and that kind of self-hate happens. And I think that's what South Asian culture experiences a lot. We have this self-hate against ourselves, and that in itself is racist and kind of pushes the narrative that not every skin type is beautiful. And it's what we struggle with and what we relate to with African Americans, and is even more reason why we should be supporting what's going on today.
Mm-hmm.
I think that with all the colorism in India, sometimes it can almost allow for racism against South Asians because we have so much internal racism among ourselves. So it normalizes the racism from other races.
Interesting. So both Sasha and Kavya brought up really important points around self-hate, that this is really a matter of self-hate and of South Asians oppressing one another, right? So where do you think all this kind of thinking and mentality and biases comes from? Malika?
Yeah, so I think we talked about this a little bit earlier, and Manishka brought up that, it comes from the colonial era of that ever since then, kind of the British were enforcing different standards and saying if you are, if you sort of have a certain skin color, then you're lesser than us. And I think just even before that, overall, if you go back in history, you see the Portuguese, you see the Mughals, and a lot of different invaders who came into the country, many of them who didn't, at least at first, explicitly enforce any color standards until the British. You kind of have this implicit notion that lighter skin is kind of better, or the lighter skin people are dominant, and then that kind of came into play later on more directly. And like Kavya and Sasha said, I think it's a really big problem because the moment you succeed in making someone hate themselves or think that they're inferior, then your job is done. You don't have to spend as many resources trying to conquer them if they think that they're just less than you because of the amount of melanin in their skin.
Yeah, so it's like cultural colonization, right? It's not just colonizing the land. It's basically it's a form and a strategy of subjugation of people by building self-hate. That's what you're saying, basically, that it was a strategy. And then you don't even have to physically restrain. You don't even have to use weapons. You don't have to use physical weapons. You're using a a psychological weapon. So what about, so we've heard that, yes, colonization, British colonization, as well as other colonization, right, from the Mughals and from coming from the north, have all had fair skin. What about the caste system? Now, Apurva did bring this up, and it's a very important issue. I know that 4 of you have grown up here in the US. Malika grew up in Mumbai and came here in high school. So what do you think, first of all, maybe about some of the things that Apurva was saying, and also I want to hear your own experience. Have you experienced, those of you who grew up here, how that's translated in any way? Have you noticed, have you recognized your privilege in higher caste? Or is that something you're learning now? And Malika, I'd love to hear from you around your experience of that in India and how you think that that is carrying over into this larger fight for anti-Blackness.
I can start, I guess. So yeah, I think Apurva made a good point about how we've kind of technically gotten rid of it in her speech, she said, but it's still, the remnants of it are still there. So I think a big part of that is kind of, yes, you get rid of it in the law, but you can't get rid of everything that's happened in the past and the communities that have been hurt because of it. And so it's always an uphill battle. And it isn't just that. I think there's still some amount of discrimination based on where you're from, and that might not come directly in the form of the caste system. It might come in things like poverty, where it's because of the caste system that people were forced into poverty. And so people say that, oh, the caste system doesn't exist anymore, but there's a correlation there that's maybe too strong to ignore.
Kavya, did you want to say something?
Well, I think that the same way that we have systematic racism built into our institutions in America, I think that while the caste system might not still be there in India, it's still kind of built into the institutions which have been there for so long. So I just found that similarity.
Mm-hmm. Himani?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard this a couple of times though. My family is Brahmin, and I've heard this not specifically in my family, but in general, I've heard this, that only Brahmins can get married, and only associate with the people in your region, and don't really go out and interact with the other castes, right? This is before, not currently. I've heard that, and I think this is really similar to what our behavior to sort of like the Black community here, because we look down, as South Asians, we look down upon those with a lower education, and usually the people with lower education are at the bottom of the caste system doing minor jobs. And so I think our perception of the African American community is that they are not as educated and not able to fill those higher spots in society. And so we look down upon them, but that is totally not true. There are some very educated and very talented people in the African American community. And I think South Asians have to do a better job of understanding that.
Mm-hmm. Sasha?
Yeah, it's interesting because my family is a special case. My dad was of a higher caste and my mom was of a lower caste. So within the family, it was it wasn't a marriage that was supported, but eventually there was acceptance. And I think just learning about my own family's history inspired me to realize that the caste system isn't something that should be supported. And we're growing out of it. Historically, we've progressed beyond like, marrying within a certain caste or marrying within race. Of course, there are still disparities in certain regions of the United States and everywhere, but I think as time goes on and like social media exists, there we do push past, such long held theories. So, yeah.
Mhm. So, I mean, this is, of course, a very, we could have a whole panel or a whole conference on caste. Not one little question in a panel. But I think it's important to bring up because, as so many of you are saying, there are parallels in the way in which the systemic oppression is built. And so when you migrate, even though it's technically abolished, and slavery is technically abolished, right? That sort of so many generations of mentality also continues to get transferred over, and we're seeing that, right? We saw that there's a case right now in Cisco where people of lower caste Dalits are feeling are experiencing all kinds of discrimination. So I think that this is something for us to keep delving deeper into. But I guess I want to ask, what do you guys as Gen Z? I mean, we know what different gen. My parents are the baby boomers. I'm Gen X. Ahana Bibi is Gen Y. That's why I've been talking about, we're all in these different generations, and you are Gen Z. You're kind of the chosen ones. Do you guys know that? It's kind of coming to you because everybody else has really messed it up. So, what do you think you can do moving forward? What is your what is our responsibility as South Asians to combat racism? And as Apurva said so beautifully, right, that when we are allied with when we are fighting anti-Blackness and allied with the African American community, we're fighting all racism because we're going to, the source of it, right? The ones who are experiencing it at the highest level.
Yeah, so I think a big part of that, and it sounds simple, is just us educating ourselves and educating not only our generation, but different generations, older generations too. And I think that just watching, so for example, my family and I, over the last 2 weeks, I think have been watching videos on a lot of the history, and we learned so many things that we didn't know. So for example, we didn't know that after the World War, that there was a GI Bill that gave veterans easy access to loans. But what we didn't know was that those loans weren't given to African American veterans. And so you can already kind of see where, like we talked about in this panel already a little bit, that disparity in education, one of the contributing factors to that could be. And so I think watching those videos is really, really important because once you know the history, it's hard to argue that there isn't some kind of problem because facts are kind of just facts sometimes. And I think there's a lot of power in that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think that also talking with fellow South Asians and trying to help them understand what the Black Lives Matter movement is about and teaching them. And so because if we talk with people who we might relate to more, they will listen to us. And I think that if we if we help other South Asians become allies to the Black Lives Matter movement, that will be very supportive.
To that, I think having these discussions is very important because just trying to start conversations about the topic as well as educating yourself on multiple perspectives, because in these conversations we don't approach it with any previous judgment or defense. We don't get defensive, so it's very important to just spark friendly conversations with your community.
Another thing that I think is really important is just taking a moment and realizing how you are sitting here. It is in large part because of the struggle of African Americans. Recently I've been hearing more about like the Immigration Act of 1965, which allowed South Asian Americans like us to come here. And if it weren't for the struggle of African Americans, we would not be sitting here. So just taking a moment and being grateful for the efforts of Black people. It's really empowering.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. We did when we did our we've been having, for those of you who are watching, we've been having some various discussions, some closed table. And now we're doing it publicly. I don't remember who it was that said this around the debt that we owe. I think it might have been Sasha that had mentioned that. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that, Sasha?
Yeah, so I had been saying that, you know, Asian Americans everywhere, especially in the United States, we owe a debt of gratitude to African Americans because the civil rights movement directly impacted, the Immigration Act of 1965, which of course led to the largest influx of South Asian immigrants to the United States. It's how we got here. It's how we were able to establish, a voice and a community for ourselves. So if anything, like the movement serves as a template for social justice movements everywhere in the US and, helps us to fights for like gender of women's movements.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of the thing is like we have to undo our own Blackness in our community in order to stand in solidarity with the African American community.
Mm-hmm. Malika, you had talked a little bit about. I would love for you to share more about this mentality this narrative that we've been fed around, well, but Indians work so hard and that's why we're where we are. And those others, they're there because it's the very, very typical narrative. And you talked about selection bias. Can you elaborate on that more?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a lot of different things to unpack there. And I think that's something that we do here in the South Asian community that, we came here with not very much, which is true, and pulled ourselves up from our bootstraps. And so there's this misconception that why can't, African Americans do the same? And so there's I think a bunch of different things to look at. The first one, like you said, is selection bias because, well, firstly, the people who were able to immigrate here because of the Hart-Celler Act of 1965, you're kind of selecting for people who already had a higher level of education from India, who were able to come and then immigrate from India to here. And then you're comparing them against people who were taken from Africa against their will and held as slaves for, like you said, almost 400 years, for a long time. And that comparison is really unfair because you're comparing literally the two extremes. And even though we Indians may not have come here with very much originally, that's definitely true. I think because they were able to have education, they were able to have something before they came here that was able to give them the ability to pull themselves up from their bootstraps. And it's not a very fair comparison to make.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So how do you think, I know we talk a lot about allyship, we had a great kind of breakdown of what are the different levels of allyship. But I would like to know, we talk about how that's helpful for the African American community and then, maybe society as a whole. But how is being an ally to Black Lives Matter and this fight help South Asians? Savia? You had said something yesterday when we were talking about this, really beautiful, so that's why I'm calling on you. I don't know if you remember. or what you can think about it while somebody else wants to say something. Manishka, maybe.
I mean, it really increases diversity everywhere. And when you're increasing diversity everywhere, you're balancing out the power so not one group has it. Like currently, what Gabia said was you said that it takes power away from the white males who have most of the power in our American society today. So by bringing the African Americans up, we increase diversity in all levels and all positions, and we increase the quality of representation, and really just elevates the standard for everyone.
Yeah, I'm sorry. That's what I said. I was, yeah. Yeah, so like Manishka just said, when instead of, we're not trying to just empower the Black community, and as we empower the Black community, it removes the unnecessary power given to the white community so that the white community and the Black community will be equal, and soon enough it will even out to the Asian community, including us too. So yeah, Manishka explained that well.
So what you're telling me is that it will increase competition. Isn't that what South Asians really like?
I don't know if it will necessarily increase competition.
In a good way.
Yeah, in a good way, where like we can all be allies, not like in a very heated way.
Well, there's often, you know, I talk about this in reference to women, right? That often there is this notion amongst women that, well, if you celebrate when a woman succeeds, that means that I'm not going to succeed, right? When another woman succeeds, like it's like you're looking at it like a pie, right? And the thing is that success is not a pie. There's enough for everyone. And what you guys are saying, really, I'm just summarizing what you're saying, is that it will elevate everyone, including us. It will diversify everything. It increases innovation, right? When you have different people in boardrooms making decisions, right? And calling the shots. Imagine that, including us. You know, we're now here in second and now third generations that are here in America. Did you have something else to add, Kavya? No. To that? Anything else to add on this topic? Himani?
I'm trying to think of an example here. So in like our college system, right? We see that Asian Americans are overrepresented in the college admissions, but if we, and African Americans are underrepresented. So we see like the affirmative action actually works against Asian Americans, but for African Americans. So if we try and get to that level of empowering African Americans, so this inequality isn't there, that will not only just empower African Americans, but that will also help us, because that will, I'm not sure how to put it, but it will allow for more opportunity for us as well.
Yeah. That's actually really interesting. I've never heard of someone like that argument about affirmative action. I think it's actually impressive, because it's for people who, I guess there's both sides to affirmative actions, but I think then regardless of what side you're on, you can kind of argue that, well, if you take away the need for affirmative action, if we're actually doing things that take away the need for it in the first place, then neither side can really complain about it, which I think is pretty smart.
Well, that's a topic that's very dear to my heart, because when I was in Berkeley, so now I'm going to have to, say the years, but in 1995, this was a really, really important topic. It was actually that was the year that affirmative action was taken away from the UC system. And I fought on the front lines for it, protested affirmative action by any means necessary. That was the movement that I was a part of because I was really passionate about it. And, you know, I've seen the very, very negative impact when it was taken away. And it's so interesting, Manishka, that you brought up the diversity issue being good for everyone, because actually, when you have diversity, right, because I got to experience the diversity, because it got abolished in 1995, but the effects didn't happen until I was gone. Right? So I got to experience what it was like. And so when you are interacting with, whether it's in the workplace or in school, with people from all kinds of different walks of life, different races and socioeconomic backgrounds, you yourself are being elevated, right? In your understanding of humanity and in decisions that you make and what you choose to do in life and in the world, right? So, and one slogan, and coming back to what you just said, Himani, which is really powerful, one slogan that we said, because I would have to argue with a lot of South Asians who were against it. They were against affirmative action because of this perception that it's bad for us. And I would vehemently argue in the dorms about it, you know, fired up. And it was that, well, it may not be justice, but it's less injustice. That was a really big slogan. So yes, if we can work towards getting to a point that we don't need it, that would be a huge success for everyone. I want to we're going to get to questions. I would like to ask, you know, the audience to please, you know, put in some questions. These ladies are, as you can see, very smart and very informed and have a lot to say. While you guys are thinking of questions, I wanted to bring your path as dancers and as young artists into the conversation. And how do you think art can be a way to build allyship? We heard something from Apurva, but I'd love to hear from you all what you think about that, or what you've maybe witnessed or seen around this. Malika?
Yeah, I think. Oh, did you call on someone, Marsha, maybe?
You. I called on you.
Okay. Yeah, so I think there's a lot that you can do with art and dance, and I think the nicest thing that Kathak specifically, we always talk about how Kathak comes from the word katha, and Samika also talked about it today in her lecture demonstration. And telling stories is a huge part of art. I know Kathak specifically, but a lot of different art forms too, tap as well. And so telling your story through dance, and I know a couple other people can also elaborate on this and like why it's so good to do it through dance. But yeah, I think telling stories is and dance is a great platform, to tell stories.
Mm-hmm.
Adding to that, yeah, so art is very powerful because it allows you to express your opinion or your idea, and if you have a unique perspective in a place that you're not feared of being judged, or people will actually listen, because when you're watching art, or the people who consume art, there's no way to get defensive. They have to just sit and take in another idea, another opinion. And art's a very powerful way to express those ideas.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think art really sparks discussion in our community because we choose the stories we want to tell. And if we choose stories that are relevant to our time, then that really helps us get to a point where people are actually talking about these things and really providing their opinions on it.
Mm-hmm. So you all have seen Speak, yes? Yeah, which is the collaboration that that me and Yorina Didi do. How do you think a show like that's just an example. I'm just using it because it's a specific example and it's something that you've experienced. How do you think a show like that builds bridges and understanding between cultures?
So Kathak and Tap are very special art forms in the way that both of them, they are both storytelling art forms, and they both were about minorities rising, whether it's the Black community or the ancient Indians, right? So when you're putting both of them on the same stage or the same platform, it's a very powerful thing, and it's like almost expressing the idea of universe, like art is universal, or that kind of, I can't find the word, but they're united in solidarity.
Sasha, you're gonna say something?
Yeah. What's really great about Speak is that it's a production that's one of its kind, and that we ourselves as a dance school are progressive in that sense, because we bring two different genres of dance and music together on one platform. You know, we see the communication between dancers and musicians, dancer to dancer, musicians to musicians. All of this is happening on one stage. And when you work in that context, and the audience even sees this, you give up factors like race, gender, societal conformity. You know, in that sense, art is pure because it's not tied down to politics. And so that's what I think Speak really portrays, that just that pureness of both dance forms and how we can communicate, you know, on any scale. And it's because it's universal. So that's what I think is great about dance.
And do you think that like art should be, for example, like something like that, what you're saying, right? Like a show like Speak, or anything. Do you think that it should be used as something for the communities that agree with you, or do you think it should be as something that it can be used as a platform to bring understanding to those who don't, maybe to those who deny racism? Do you think that art can be actually a way of maybe reaching people?
I think that art, the great thing about art is that it can be interpreted in so many ways. Of course, the artist always has something which they want to portray, but there's a lot of different ways in ways that someone can see it. So I think that art is open to all people, different political backgrounds with different opinions, and it really depends on how they decide to view it, and it might not be what the artist is trying to show, but everyone will get something out of it.
Yes, I completely agree. So just adding on to what you said, it's very powerful if you want to use it for people who disagree with you, because it's a very indirect and beautiful way of portraying your message, right? It's really easy for them to get offended if you're telling them directly, and when you're spreading it through art, they probably won't get offended, and they probably won't even realize that you're trying to spread a message. They'll just, from within. So I think we should utilize it because it's a very powerful tool.
Very well said, Mishka. Yeah. Don't even realize that you're expanding their minds and coming to, coming to a different place at the end of the performance. So on that note, we have a couple of questions, and I was gonna ask this as the last thing, but it has come into our questions. So from Sima Kantak, she has asked, what is one thing you will do to initiate change in your community through dance or otherwise? And I'm actually going to start with Kavya, because I'd really like for Kavya to share with everyone something she's done recently. And the fact that she's only 14 and has already done this means that there's lots to come. So Kavya, please share, and others start thinking.
Well, in my school, I have noticed that there isn't much Black representation in our history classes. And by learning about white historical figures, it really does shape our modern day views and what we think of history and how we can and what we know about ourselves. And so I decided to write to my principal and ask her for more representation in the history classes to make sure that we learn about Black authors, Black historical figures, and a lot about the Black Lives Matter movement, and that we need more anti-racism education in our school, because I think that I think somebody else had mentioned this, but it's really important to start off our education about this stuff from a young age. So my school starts in 4th grade. So I think that it would be very beneficial to learn about anti-racism and a lot of people's hidden biases from a young age. So then by the time we become older, we can be really great allies rather than having to take our time to do all of our research on our own.
Mm-hmm.
I agree completely, and I really admire what you did. But from my perspective, I just forgot what I was going to say. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Okay, I just remembered. So the way we learn about the slave trade in our schools, it's very biased towards like America. Like even the way we learn about the slave trade, not just about white figures, like historical figures. So I think that I was looking, and if you like look at a history textbook from the UK, it's very shocking to realize that the way they study it is very different the way different countries study foreign affairs. So I think that we need to globalize, like have a global history system where we really take the time to look at what authors we've read, what books we've read, and see if I've read one book about this topic from an American author, maybe read one from a British author, one from an author from another country, because we need to get like multiple perspectives on the same idea, because we don't even realize that these things that we're reading have this in them.
Yeah, I'm also jumping on the history bandwagon a little bit with Kavya, obviously doing an amazing job, and I agree with everything Manishka said. For us, our school does world history freshman year, and it's funny they call it world history when it's basically French history, European history, and like a little bit of American history. They don't mention Asia at all, Africa at all, or any other place. So I think that's pretty problematic that it's called world history, and it's also, I'm pretty sure it's not something that's based on, like there's a curriculum outside of school. I think the school has the possibility to change it, and my friends and I complain about it, and we've done so since freshman year, but we've not taken the step to actually go and change it. And so I think that's something that I would want to do.
Mm-hmm. Others have thoughts on what you can do? Remember that there's nothing too small. We heard actually from our younger ones who were not on the public panel, but we had our closed panel from our younger ones who had some really, really great ideas for things that they wanted to do. I'll share them after you guys are finished with the audience, because I think it's important for the audience to actually know. But Hamani, you go. You were going to say something.
Yeah, so today in the closed roundtable, I was talking about how I read this book called The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks this year in 9th grade. And that really opened my eyes into how underappreciated the African-American community is in every way. Our medical industry, all the science research that we do wouldn't have been possible without Henrietta Lacks, who was a Black woman whose cells were used to create an immortal cell line. And that research that we have done, all the research that comes out of the medical and biological industry today, it's all based off of her cells. And yeah, I would agree with Kavya, Malika, and Manishka that it needs to start off with an early age. If I had read that book when I was in like 7th grade or so, then I would have a completely different perspective about it now. I would have done more research about it, and I would be far ahead of the game. And so starting off early is just making our community more progressive. Rather than having that change occur later on, we're actually starting off early, and we'll see the impacts of that earlier. So.
Mm-hmm. So pushing for and getting involved somehow with earlier education, but less biased education, not education that's biased towards a white supremacist system, right? That kind of forgives America for its mistakes, but actually puts it out there more for its truths, which is what history should be, right? That's basically what you're saying, right? Learn the truths. It doesn't make it less history. I mean, it doesn't make the history, you know, erased. It just makes it truthful. Yeah. Sasha, did you have something?
Yeah, I think, yeah, it's starting, like everybody said, like starting at a young age and re-educating, because of course our education system in itself has racial disparities. Like you know, the AP book list, for example, most of the authors on that are, you know, European or white. And, you know, there's maybe a few of those like books that are by African American authors that sometimes students aren't even exposed to, and they never get to read that literature. So it's important that.
Oh, we lost your sound.
Oh,
go ahead. You're good now.
Okay. So yeah, like I was saying, it's just important that students are exposed to, you know, current events and also like Black literature through the years. And also, I just wanted to say that an effective method is, you know, supporting, and then when you are of age to vote, vote in trusted officials. So those who aren't already a part of the corrupt system that we, you know, experience today, if we can break that and, you know, elect in officials who do actually care, you know, about what's going on, about our communities, then we can actually make a change. I've signed petitions, you know, that's a thing that we all do. Donating to local organizations like Apurva was talking about in her talk. So that's just something that is important.
Mm-hmm. You're registered, Sasha?
I'll be registered by the primary election, so I can vote.
Are you going to be 18?
In August, I will be 18.
Malika, are you going to be 18 in time for the election?
Yeah, also in August.
Yeah. Good. Good. So yes, these are some really, really important things to start thinking about. I just wanted to share with the audience that some of our younger girls were talking about redlining and how their own neighborhoods have benefited from it. These are 12-year-olds. And they were talking about, one of our girls was talking about very specifically, she would like to go and join a tutoring program in East Palo Alto, which is just across the bridge from where she lives, to engage with African American girls her age to see if, you know, or younger, you know, to get involved. So I was so happy to hear that. So there's a lot of really amazing things that are coming out of all of these conversations. If there are not any other questions from our audience, I am going to kind of wrap this up. First of all, I want to say that, you know, as we know, that this is not a conversation that began this weekend, and it is not a conversation that will end this weekend. This is a very long-term, this is long-term and it's deep work that we all must be a part of. I have been so inspired by all of you. That's honestly the reason why this conference is happening, is because all of you have so much to bring. I already mentioned it before, and I'm going to say it again. we really are looking to you to lead the way. You know, we have, as adults, you know, we have skills, we have knowledge, and we have our own experience of all of these things. But what has been happening up until now hasn't been working. It's not working. And we've reached a point where, you know, we're at a crossroads. And it is your spirit, your particular, I think Malika brought up earlier that you all have seen all of this from, you know, Trayvon Martin's killing was when you were little. And so since you were very little, you were seeing how this is not right. This is not right, right? Which is a unique, that's why you're a unique generation. All of this has been coming up since, you know, it's just been, it was never normalized for you. It was always bad. And I think that that's a big reason why you all are really poised to do so much. So I want to thank all of you for coming forward, being brave and speaking out. And we are all really looking forward to seeing more of what you do. We're going to keep having these conversations in class. And I am going to adjourn this panel. I want to thank all of the schools. I want to thank, of course, you know, I'm really proud that Chandam School of Kathak is, you know, provided this platform for these ladies to be able to speak out. I want to thank my partner, Sabi Lee, on, you know, being a fierce leader and educator of the Chandam School, of course, dancer. I'm not going to get into all that. I want to thank Reena Mehta, my guru sister, who runs the Leela Academy in LA and is teaching, you know, these girls to empower themselves and be ambassadors of themselves first, through their training of the dance. I want to thank my guru sister, Dr. Sarah Morelli from Denver, for Sarila Academy, and you know, doing the same, empowering our next generations to through the dance to come up with ways to expand our own minds, and then hence, you know, societies. And I want to acknowledge Ahana Mukherjee, who is assistant director of the youth company, who has also been working very hard and working with these ladies. All of the Chandam Youth Company members and ladies from Alila Academy and Sarila, who have been a part of organizing this, you guys have done a phenomenal job for the first ever conference. You know, I am pretty blown away by all of your skills. So, you know, it's not over. This is kind of the beginning. I want to acknowledge, of course, our source guru, Pandit Chitresh Das. It was his vision. It was his radical vision to bring Kathak to America. He's the one who brought it here on American soil. Just even the act of coming here and having the audacity to teach Kathak dance, an Indian classical dance form, first to, you know, American whites, and then to Indians, middle-class Indians who were here as scientists and as skilled, you know, workers, not here to dance, but still was pushed against the grain and against what is conventional, to use art as a way for elevating all of us, socially, physically, mentally, and spiritually. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And please go to blackwomenblueprint.org for donating. That is the organization that these girls have all selected as the kind of, you know, reason that we are having this conference. So please do go and donate to that. Thank you. Please stay in touch. You can follow us on social media, follow our YouTube account. And Hannah is putting up the slide that has all of that information. Thank you so much. Namaskar.